Hello and welcome to the Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. We're going to continue here with the Belarus story as things have been developing. We had President Lukashenko of Belarus say to RT, and it's on their website right now, Belarus is being used as a trampoline to attack Russia. To discuss this, I'm joined by Marcus Papadopoulos. He is the editor and publisher of First Politics magazine. And we have George Samueli. He is a writer, author, commentator, and a founding member of this YouTube channel. Let me go to Marcus first here. Let's reflect upon that quote. I mean, he said that as if it was something that suddenly came to his mind. I mean, of course, Belarus is a small strategic pawn for the foreign policy blob establishment in the West, particularly in the UK and the United States. Go ahead, Marcus.
Let me say two things, first of all, Peter, to that. Firstly, Belorussia, which is Belarus's proper historical name, is Russia, and Russia is Belorussia. Both countries form part of the Russian world. And secondly, Belarusians are Russians. Indeed, some years ago, President Alexander Lukashenko, in response to a question from a foreign journalist about the differences between Belarusians and Russians, responded by saying, there is no difference. Belarusians are Russians. Secondly, the frustration and irony for Vladimir Putin is that whilst Lukashenko has ensured that Belarus or Belorussia has firmly been in Russia's orbit and is Russia's most important friend and ally, not just in the near abroad, the former Soviet Union, but on the international scene in general, the irony for Putin is that because of Lukashenko, the union state between Russia and Belarus has not materialized. Why? Because ultimately, Lukashenko wants to be the president of the union state. He wants to be in the Kremlin. And that's what he aspired to in the 1990s when he was faced with the decrepit Boris Yeltsin. But as soon as Putin arrived in 2000, Lukashenko knew that his ambitions had squashed.
Just to echo that, I can remember that very, very clearly in the waning days of Yeltsin's time in the Kremlin, on the airwaves, all across the airwaves in Russia, Lukashenko had a very, very high profile, and there were people in places of power that did look to him as a possible successor to Yeltsin here. George, I agree with everything that Marcus just said. Is the differences between the people of Belarus and Russia are non-existent, but there is a difference between Russia and Belarus, and that is Lukashenko himself and his personal ambitions. And what he has done is he's isolated himself. I mean, the number of treaties and agreements that Belarus has signed with Russia that have not been fulfilled, and Lukashenko uses that as a cudgel to turn west. And while at the same time the West calls him the last dictator in Europe. I mean, you can play this game just so long and then you're cornered. And this is what he's done to himself. Go ahead, George.
Yes, I agree. And Marcus is absolutely right in everything he says about that. There's no real difference between Russians and Belarusians. They're the same people. They speak the same language. They're part of the same world. Now, I think the Russian view was that fine. I mean, the USSR created this artificial state, as the USSR created many artificial states. In the post-Soviet era, fine. If you want to maintain it, okay. But it made sense for Russia and Belarus to gradually merge, and maybe into some union state. And that was the general idea, because it made very little sense for them to maintain separate existences. And Lukashenko had agreed to this, but has done nothing to facilitate it. He has behaved like the spoiled teenager, which is he enjoys all the benefits of living at home with his parents, but doesn't contribute anything to the household costs. So that's what he's done. He's been playing this little game of, well, he enjoys the privileged access he has to the Russian market, and the subsidized energy that he gets, but he's not prepared to put anything into the costs of the common state. Now, he was hoping that he would just play off Russia and the West indefinitely, bringing in the United States. I mean, that's a big deal that the United States now suddenly has an embassy in Minsk and so on. And of course, now he finds himself in trouble because anybody who starts an embassy in your capital is suddenly facing a coup. I mean, gee, what a shock!
Marcus, we shouldn't be surprised.
A coup the next day.
We shouldn't be surprised by any of this because we've seen it before. And George and I, and particularly Dmitry Babic, who is extremely knowledgeable on Belarus. I mean, you can see the breakup of Yugoslavia playbook in play because, look for the nationalists or create nationalists and uses the cudgel against Russia. Well, in this case, it doesn't really work, and that's why the West is very frustrated because its typical game plan can't come to fruition because it doesn't exist. I mean, there'll be those that will say, "I'll take the role, I'll do it for you." We see that also, and that's what makes it very messy. I for one, I think that Belarus does need reform. Okay, we have low energy prices, we have low energy demand, and that has really showed the weakness of the Belarusian economy. And maybe it should loosen up and have less state control over it. I think that would help. But Lukashenko wants to have all of that power. But as George has mentioned before, is that the tractors that Belarus makes, well, they're not purchased in Belarus, and they certainly don't go to the European Union. They go to Russia, okay? So, I mean, he has very limited things here. And George's analogy of a spoiled teenager is absolutely right. He has to take responsibility. Marcus.
All of that is absolutely correct, Peter. But we have to acknowledge that Belarus, because of Lukashenko, is one of the most stable countries in Europe. Indeed, people's salaries are paid on time, pensions are paid on time, crime is almost non-existent there, and there is no homelessness. And because of Lukashenko, Belarus did not experience the catastrophic effects of shock therapy that the Russian Federation did. That said, however, Belarus's stability is on account of Russian subsidies and loans. But turning to what we have been seeing over the last week or so in Minsk, it is very clear that what is happening there is, in Western parlance, an attempt at a coloured revolution. But in reality, we would describe it as an attempt by the West to instigate a coup there. However, there is no chance of a Western coup materialising in Belorussia. Indeed, there's more chance of hell freezing over. Why? Firstly, a Belarusian national identity has an insignificant presence in Belarus. It is very similar to how a Ukrainian national consciousness came into play in the late 19th century. And both a Ukrainian national consciousness and a Belarusian national consciousness are both artificial. But even more important than that, coupled with how the overwhelming majority of Belarusians seek reunion with the Russian motherland, is that de facto Belarus is a protectorate of the Russian Federation, or is a de facto province of the Russian Federation. Indeed, the Belarusian security apparatus, the military, the interior, and the intelligence are a branch of the Russian security apparatus. Many of my sources in the Russian military have confirmed that to me over many, many years now. So there is just no chance of a Western coup materializing. And what I believe, Peter, is, very quickly, if I can just say this, what I think will come out of this is that because of the attempt by the West to instigate a coup in Belarus, I believe that Lukashenko is truly now at the mercy of Putin. And I believe this will lay the ground for the materialization of the Union state. And if Lukashenko steps down, it will not be because of the protests. The protests are insignificant. It will be because Putin demands he steps down so that the process of the Union state coming into being can take place.
That makes perfect sense to me because there's not this groundswell of Belarusian nationalism and identity and self-determination. I don't see that at all. But it's really about one individual, and I don't really like to say that, because it would seem to echo the Western playbook for regime change. It's Gaddafi, it's Milosevic. These are always the problem. In a sense that it is about one individual, because Lukashenko is really serving his own interests. Because the Russians want to have, the Kremlin, if you want to say, wants to have good relations with Belarus for the obvious reasons that you explained in your first answer. And there is one person in the way. And that's what it's all about here. And I really, really want to make sure our viewers understand is that the last thing the Russians want to do is to have to take action in Belarus. That's the last thing they want to do. Go ahead, George.
Yes, that is the last thing they want to do. And the effect of the European and American involvement is that it's actually making this more likely. Had the Western powers played their hand more intelligently, they could have continued to cultivate Lukashenko, and thereby creating a rift between Belarus and Russia. I mean, it's a foolish policy, but at least there is a certain geopolitical sense to it. What doesn't make sense is for the West to invest in Lukashenko, cultivating him, having Pompeo come to Minsk and befriending him. Belarus is part of this the European partnership and so on. And then to turn around the next day and say, "Oh, he's the last dictator in Europe. He's the worst person." So in other words, they're now in this position of reversing their policy, and now that they're pouring in very large sums of money into Belarus, supporting civil society, whatever it's called. I mean, we're talking $50 million. I mean, for a poor country like Belarus, that's a lot of money. So there's no other purpose to it but to create problems and headaches for the Russians and the Belarusians.
It's always
no other than the kind of destructiveness.
Yeah, it's always the equated quagmire. I have to wonder how well educated Lukashenko is, because I think we all know, going back to the spring of 2014, is that you had luminaries from the European Union, foreign ministers from Eastern Europe and the Baltic states visiting Yanukovych, and they all signed an agreement, and the political reform and all that. The ink hadn't even dried, and they walked away from their own agreement. So the references here is Pompeo visits Minsk. Are you going to believe Pompeo? I wouldn't do that. And that's why when I started out our program here, Belarus is being used as a trampoline to attack Russia. Well, Lukashenko is right on that point, but it's his fault, Marcus.
I don't believe that Alexander Lukashenko truly trusted Mike Pompeo or any other American official. And when he agreed to British Marines earlier this year traveling to Belarus to conduct maneuvers with their Belarusian counterparts, I don't believe that he sincerely wanted to pursue a new close relationship with Britain. I think that's his way of reminding the Kremlin that Belarus will always be Russia's most solid friend and ally in the world. But at the same time, we will continue to have our independence, or probably, to be more precise, it's Lukashenko's way of saying to Putin that I will remain in charge in Belarus. And I have no doubt, Peter, that had Putin not come to power in 2000, if the decrepit Yeltsin had continued, and if the Union state had materialized, and I sincerely hope the Union state will materialize, but I believe Lukashenko would have been a solid leader of the Union state.
I remember those times very, very clearly, and I absolutely agree with you. He was definitely being groomed by certain elements of the elites around Yeltsin, definitely, just because of his media profile. All right, George, finish up here, because I think at the end of the day, Lukashenko is being silly, because he's just alienated Mike Pompeo and his overtures, and Putin, with endless amount of patience, well, maybe that patience is coming to an end. 30 seconds, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think there's no real future other than Lukashenko finally signing on to the Union state. Having said that, the West is playing a very, very dangerous game here, because all this money and this support for the opposition could lead to violence and some kind of civil war, and that is a very, very bad situation.
All right, thank you, Marcus and George, for joining the Gaggle. See you both soon, and we're watching Belarus.